Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Learning Latin at Domi at home. Um, Today we're going to learn about indirect statement, and let's just jump right into it. All right, so everything that we've done up until now has been direct statement, right? We just hear what the truth is. Catullus envies the sparrow. Catullus is a Roman poet. Aquarius prepares words. All of these sentences are directly stated, directly to us. There's no intermediary. And for these sentences, we've got a nominative subject and we've got a conjugated verb. So now let's look at these in Latin. If you want a little extra translation practice, now would be a good time to pause the video and translate these on your own. All right, and here are your answers. So, as we see, nominative subject, Catullus here, Aquarius in the last one, and we conjugate the verb to agree with the subject. In videat, third person singular agrees with Catullus. Est, third person singular, agrees with our singular subject. And parat, third person singular, again, agrees with our third person subject. Okay? All things we are pretty familiar with. We see a nice accusative neuter plural here, verbum, verbi, neuter. So that's why there's an A ending here. We see a nice predicate nominative, right? Because Roman poet equals Catullus. So we're going to have it be the same case as Catullus. And then up here, we have something tricky going on. We may or may not have gone over this in class yet. But in video, instead of taking an accusative like we might expect, it actually takes a dative. So even though this looks like an accusative direct object, because the verb is in video, we're going to make this, the case of sparrow here, dative. All right? So there's just a little information about that. But now let's look at the new topic, which is indirect statement. So what even is indirect statement in English? That is when someone else in English reports an action to you. So it could be the girl thinks that Catullus envies the sparrow. Before, it was just Catullus envies the sparrow, right? That's what we were doing before. It was just Catullus envies the sparrow, directly reported. Now we're saying that, it's actually some girl who thinks that Catullus envies the sparrow, perhaps the girl of Catullus's dreams. So that's going to change things a little bit in how the grammar works out. Other examples of verbs that report other actions, you could have the man believes, the man hears that Catullus envies the sparrow, the poet tells that Catullus envies the sparrow. You notice you can generally figure it out by trying to report an action with the verb. You can figure out if that verb is capable of introducing indirect statement, right? So if you say, for example, kick, you're not going to say the girl kicks that the sky is blue. That doesn't make any sense, right? You could say that the girl says that the sky is blue. That's a way to determine whether or not a verb is a reporting verb or not. So to go back to the basics, I've drawn some arrows here to show you where the direct statement in the sentence is, the girl thinks, and where the indirect statement is, what the girl is thinking, right? The girl is thinking that Catullus envies the sparrow. In indirect statement, we're going to have a new set of rules. The subject is now going to be accusative subject, and the verb is going to be an infinitive. So what's the subject of the indirect statement here? Catullus. What's the verb in indirect statement here? Envies. Nicely done. Catullus will be in the accusative when we translate the sentence. Envies will be in the infinitive form. Accusative subjects can only take infinitive verbs. Remember that. You're not going to conjugate a verb to match an accusative subject. All right, let's look at this translated now. Puella putat, that's the girl thinks. Catullum in the accusative. Invidere envies the sparrow. Note two things. One, that doesn't come into the Latin at all. We don't have to translate a word for that. We just use that in English. And it's a useful thing to remind yourself that, oh, that's going to be an indirect statement. But we don't actually translate that into Latin. Passeri is another thing to note. You notice that it still remains in the dative because its role hasn't changed. It's still the object of invidere, and we know that invidere takes a dative. So we have dative with invideo. All right, let's look at a couple more examples. Don't worry if you haven't gotten this yet. You don't have to understand it immediately. That's just the beginning. This is just the beginning. All right, so more examples. They tell that Catullus is a Roman poet. Narrant is going to be they tell, right? And then when we add Catullus est poeta Romana, if we want to make this an indirect statement off of Narrant, we have to change Catullus, our subject, to the accusative, and we need to change our verb est to the infinitive. Notice one other thing. Take a moment and think, why is our predicate nominative now accusative? Use the logic. And take a second and reflect. The reason, and you can pause the video if you haven't had enough time, the reason is that we're now renaming an accusative subject rather than a nominative subject. So because we're still renaming Catullum, we still want poetam Romanum to match Catullum in case. So they're going to make it now what we're going to call this as like a predicate accusative. You don't really need to know that term. You just need to know that if we're an indirect statement, this is now going to be accusative to match the accusative subject when we have a linking verb. Okay? Now we see that Aquarius is preparing words. Videmus, we see, plus now Aquarius whereby parat is going to become our subject of the indirect statement is Aquarius. So aquarium comes down in the accusative. Is preparing is our verb. So we're going to make that into the infinitive, parare. And words would be the direct object in the main clause. It stays the accusative direct object in the indirect statement. Okay? So one question might come up as you look at this. The sentence is a little bit less obvious than others, but maybe someone has thought of it. How do we tell whether aquarium is the subject of parare or whereby is the subject of parare? Context is helpful here. Words probably aren't going to prepare Aquarius. It's much more likely that Aquarius prepares words. But the real trick to remember is in Latin, basic word order, nominative, direct object, verb. In the same way, when we're an indirect statement, the accusative subject, right? So I guess I shouldn't say nominative, I should say subject, direct object, verb. The accusative subject is going to come before the accusative direct object. So you just take the first accusative as the subject, the second accusative as the direct object. Okay? I know that's a lot of info, but we're going to do some examples now, give you a chance to work through them on your own, and then I'll show you the answers. Here's my advice. When you tackle these sentences, start by separating the direct statement from the indirect statement. Put a box around the indirect statement. Then go and decide what is the subject of your indirect statement and what word is the verb in your indirect statement. And remember to make the subject accusative and the verb infinitive. Follow those 3 steps. Find your indirect statement, box it off, then find the subject of the accusative statement, make it accusative. Find the verb in indirect statement, make it infinitive. And do that for each of these 3 sentences. All right? Pause the video now to work on that, and then I'll show you the answers. All right, here they are. Again, so if I was actually going to translate this sentence from scratch, I would box off the indirect statement. I would maybe underline this and say, oh, that's my accusative subject. Bring it down, make it accusative. Bring remains down, make it infinitive. And now I can go back and tackle my main clause, which I should be pretty comfortable with. This is just the sister direct statement, so I can just make it nominative subject. And I can make the verb conjugated to agree with sister, so it's singular third person. soror putat puera manere. Next one, I box off. I underline maybe the subject. I think about, right, I highlight the verb in my mind. In the indirect statement, I bring that down, that's amare. I bring family down, that's familiam. I have accusative direct object, that's not going to change an indirect statement, so I can just make that accusative, plural, because it's memories. And then I can go back and do this part. You can also do this part at the beginning, but just make, right, your subject nominative, because it's in a direct statement. Conjugate your verb to agree with it. All right. A reminder, another thing to recall when you're doing these, you're never going to have two verbs that are conjugated in one Latin phrase. You need to have either a sed or an et to a conjunction of some kind, right? To or subordinating conjunction or pronoun in order to have another conjugated verb. So that's another way to remember that. Oh, I can't translate amare. I can't conjugate amare. All right, and finally, box this off. And you get your indirect statement again, right? So you remember that you don't translate that. You just bring the farmer down, make it accusative because it's the subject. Is the second principal part of sum is esse, so agricolam esse. And then you bring down great and make it magnum because it has to match agricolam because you're describing agricolam. The trick here was agricolam is one of those jobs held by men, so it's actually masculine, and so we have to make it magnum, not magnam. And then we think it's just conjugated regularly, putamus. All right. Don't worry if you're not totally comfortable with this again. You can watch me walk through some of the examples some more before doing exercise 3 in your workbook. But working through that exercise should be helpful. And then we're going to spend, the next class and the class after that doing more practice with this so that you get more comfortable. All right. See you next class.